Hello. Thank you so much for joining us for At Home with the Smithsonian Libraries, A Colorful Conversation. I'm Gabriella Kahn from the Smithsonian Library's Advancement Team, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our program for a few moments of some hopefully educational escape during these challenging times. We hope that everything will go as smoothly as possible, but just in case there are any hiccups, please bear with us. We're recording the program so that we can share it with those who weren't able to join us today, or if there are any technical issues. And just like so many of you, our speakers are at home with families and pets, so please excuse any potential background sounds or surprise visitors. So, do you know what color you get when you mix red and green light? The answer, which you'll find out a little bit later, might surprise you. Even though color is such an important part of our lives, there's still so much about it that we don't know or even understand. And that's why, well, it's one of the reasons why our speakers today decided to delve into color for their fabulous exhibition, Saturated, the Allure and Science of Color. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Jennifer Cohlman Bracchi, Acting Head Librarian at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Library, and Susan Brown, Associate Curator and Acting Head of Textiles at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Jen and Susan are going to share some stories and unexpected discoveries that they made while co-curating Saturated, and we'll have plenty of time for your questions at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen and Susan.
Great. Thanks, Gabi.
Thanks, Gabi.
And thanks everyone for joining us. Susan and I are both excited to spend some time with you today talking about what has become one of my favorite topics, color. But first, I'd like to say that the Saturated exhibition is a wonderful example of how the museums and libraries collaborate at the Smithsonian. While we librarians support the research of our curators and scientists across the institution, with things like interlibrary loan and subscription databases, we are also a collecting unit, just like the museums, with world-class special collections that are worthy of exhibitions in their own right. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of those with you today. If you have not been to the Cooper Hewitt Museum, I encourage you to visit one day in the future when we can again. We are located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan in Andrew Carnegie's old mansion. It's a wonderful place celebrating all things design. The library resides in the adjoining townhouses with 2 lovely reading rooms. We have nearly 100,000 volumes with 15,000 rare books focused on the history of design and decorative arts. Many of our rare books, including most of the ones from the Saturated exhibition, are scanned and accessible online for your viewing pleasure. So why color? My story with color began with an open call for a Smithsonian Library's exhibition topic that would demonstrate the breadth and depth of our collections. The Smithsonian Libraries consists of 21 branches covering science, history, art, and culture, totaling over 2 million volumes. So finding a single topic to cover all of that seemed daunting until the idea of color came to mind. Not only is color a central part to all of those areas, but as it turns out, the most important writers and thinkers about color came from equally diverse disciplines. I knew Cooper Hewitt Library had a great collection of color-related resources, and the reason we do is an interesting story that I'll tell a little later. But first, I want to emphasize that the Smithsonian Library's branches across our 21 branches have rich holdings in color-related materials. And together we have one of the nation's and the world's most definitive collections on color. My first exhibition, Color in a New Light, was modest in size but big in ambition, filling 2 large cases at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. It included 24 books and 7 objects. Bridging science, history, art, and culture through vibrant colored charts and book illustrations, it got the attention of corporate sponsor Benjamin Moore, which allowed us to extend our reach, and we were able to feature color-based workshops in Washington, D.C., and at the Cooper Hewitt in New York. planting early seeds for a future exhibition.
So yes, back in the pre-COVID days, Jen and I used to meet for lunch in Cooper Hewitt's beautiful garden. And her enthusiasm for the topic of color was so contagious that I started thinking it would be great to do an expanded version of the exhibition by pairing the books with objects from the museum's collection that demonstrate color concepts as they're expressed in everyday objects. Color is a huge part of our day-to-day experience of the world, but for a lot of people, their color education ends in grade school. We found that people were really hungry for more information about how color works. So by combining our two collections, we had a unique opportunity to build color literacy in a very visually exciting way, showcasing the library's incredible collection of rare books on color theory, while using the museum's collection to illustrate key concepts in action.
And that's how Saturated came to be. This exhibition, like Susan said, brought together extraordinary rare books from across Smithsonian libraries and compelling, colorful objects from the Cooper Hewitt's permanent collection to explore how the sensory experience of color has been conceived by history's greatest color thinkers, visualized with graphic tools and models, and used by designers to bring order and excitement to our visual world. Featuring 190 objects, 44 of which were rare books, it was successful by all measures, landing reviews in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, as well as local TV coverage. The Cooper Hewitt website has a channel devoted to this exhibition, which includes images of the books and the objects along with the label copy and related blog posts, and you'll see a link in the chat if you'd like to explore more. So Susan and I organized the exhibition around 7 main themes, ranging from how color is made to how it is used to sell products. And deciding on those themes was not an easy task when you have a topic as big as color.
And yet, the topics that the books covered are ones that are still relevant to design practice today. They included how different materials are colored and how we create new colors for new materials, how color helps us understand three-dimensional space and organize complex information in maps and infographics, how color optics are used to create dynamic designs, how designers and manufacturers communicate behind the scenes about color using specialized tools, and how color is used to connect with or seduce particular consumers.
The first section of the exhibition, Capturing Color, served as the backbone of the show, greeting visitors with an introduction to the basic principles of how color works. At the entrance, we drew people in with beautiful color wheels and explained that many of these book illustrations are actually two-dimensional representations of three-dimensional models that incorporate hue, saturation, and brightness. We also emphasized the diverse backgrounds the people who created these color systems came from entomologists to chemists, from artists to physicists. Each person had their own problem they were trying to solve. This was the oldest color wheel on display. It's from 1776 and was created to help with the identification of insects. So no surprise, it's held at the Smithsonian's Cohlman Library of Natural History. This beautiful color wheel was a recent acquisition purchased specifically for the Saturated exhibition and made possible by the Marjorie F. Missinter Endowment for the Cooper Hewitt Library. Donor support is essential for the building of our special collections and enabling our exhibition programs like this one. We could not do what we do without it. Now, this 12-pointed star was created by Professor Johannes Itten as an educational tool for students at the Bauhaus. Students were instructed to cut the star out and tape the black tips together, creating a three-dimensional sphere or globe. This demonstrated the relationship between hue, saturation, and brightness. Hue, or what we commonly call color, is the color circle that forms in the middle along what would be the equator. These colors are at their most saturated, meaning there is no presence of white or black. For brightness, imagine the Earth's axis with the North Pole being white and the South Pole being black, and a grayscale running through the center. Moving north from the equator adds white, moving south adds black, and then moving towards the center axis would add gray. Today, these three components continue to be the foundation for how color works with digital tools and devices. And this very special hand-painted and collaged color model was a bit of a surprise discovery in the Cooper Hewitt's collection. It was featured in the 1960 Cooper Union Museum exhibition, The Logic and Magic of Color, a significant exhibition in our own museum's history, which I will talk about a little more later. That exhibition, like Saturated, featured the creation of color or how color is made, including the ingredients and processes used to make and apply dyes. When researching color, it becomes obvious that much of the research has and still is coming out of the dye, and specifically the textile dye industry.
Yes, the history of the development of specialized, often very complex techniques to color different materials, from textiles to glass and anodized metals to plastics, is a fascinating one, and again, an ongoing one. As we develop new materials and techniques, like the brilliant 3D printed vase by Michael Eden that you see here, we need to develop new ways of coloring them. Eden was trained as a ceramist, but in exploring this new material, he wanted to create both a form and a color that could not be achieved in traditional ceramic techniques. Many people are familiar with the story of William Henry Perkin, the 17-year-old budding chemist who accidentally discovered the first synthetic dye known as Perkins Movine, and which you see in the scarf on the right. His invention had major implications for fields from pharmaceuticals to explosives. But as a textile person, I like to give a shout out to the genius of the indigenous dyers who mastered the art of dyeing with the ink of certain shellfish, which you see in this Mexican huipil on the left. The colors are nearly identical, as you see, so it wasn't that Perkin created a better dye or a more brilliant dye, as that he created a cheaper and more consistently reproducible color, which remains an issue today. If you think of something like a running shoe that has many component parts, achieving the same color on different materials and having it appear the same color under different lighting conditions is a problem that still occupies the attention of many color chemists and engineers. The inspiration for this part of the exhibition was my favorite book, The Wiener Farben Cabinet. Published in 1794, it includes hand-colored samples of nearly 3,000 shades, kind of like a handmade Pantone guide, but also includes instructions for applying those colors to a variety of different materials, from wool and silk to feathers, wood, bone, and horn.
This book is one of my favorites too, and I want to mention some special treatment it received in the lead up to the exhibition. It was printed in what is called German black letter, specifically the Fracter typeface, which is not machine readable, which means it can't be keyword searchable or allow the copying and pasting of text. As you can see here, it's very difficult to read, but we were able to work with the Smithsonian's Transcription Center and their crowdsourcing platform where volunteers from all over the world transcribe a variety of Smithsonian collections. In under almost a year, 100 people transcribed all 620 pages. It is still in German, but at least it's in machine readable German, and so it can be keyword searched, and text can be copied and pasted maybe into a translator. So getting back to our lesson in color literacy, I'd like to share two of my favorite books in the exhibition, which really set the stage for modern color theory. This is one of our rarest and most groundbreaking books on color, J.C. LeBlanc's Colorito from 1725. Only 15 to 20 copies of this book were printed, so I couldn't believe my eyes when I found an original copy in our library catalog held at the American Art Portrait Gallery Library. Colorito is significant for two reasons. First, it is the first publication to document the mixing of primitive or primary colors into secondary colors. So yellow and blue make green was first documented in this book, as you can see here on the right. And second, it formed the foundation of our modern color printing process. Think CMYK. Leblanc was a printer and engraver seeking a way to mechanically reproduce portraits with layered inks. Here we see his reduced color palette that includes combinations of red, blue, yellow, white, and black, and a completed print using this technique. He demonstrated that you only need a few select colors of ink to create an endless array of hues, tints, and shades. Now, Leblanc was addressing the mixing of paints or pigments, which he noted is much different than the mixing of colored light. Just 20 years before Coloredo, Isaac Newton published his groundbreaking work, Optics, where he defined our visible spectrum by measuring wavelengths of light. Despite Newton's achievements, proving white light is composed of all of the colors of the rainbow, it was strongly rejected by artists whose understanding of color mostly came from the mixing of pigments and paints, not from light. So something surprising to me in researching this, and to many people on our tours, was that the exhibition, it was that primary colors of light are different than the primary colors of pigments. I love to quiz them with the question that Gabi asked at the beginning: what color do green and red light make when mixed together? The answer is yellow. So the diagram on the left shows the mixing of colored lights called additive color mixing, and the diagram on the right shows the mixing of colored pigments called subtractive color mixing. The primary colors of pigments are familiar to most of us: yellow, red, and blue, or for printing, yellow, magenta, and cyan. The primary colors of light are red, green, and blue, with red and green producing the secondary color yellow. So knowing how important light is to color, Susan and I logically wanted to include something that demonstrated this relationship. This was no easy task though, and I could never have anticipated the complexities that it posed.
That's right. So I can understand on an intellectual level that color does not exist without light, or that color is a phenomenon that only happens when light strikes an object. But deep down, I believe that my red shoes are still red, even in the dark. So in order to really drive home the effect of light, we wanted to create a visceral experience for our visitors. So first, our wonderful exhibitions team replaced all of the bulbs in the very large chandelier that hangs over the grand staircase in the Carnegie Mansion with the Philips Hue light bulb, which is programmable. We programmed it to transition through different temperatures of white light, from a cool early morning to midday sun to a kind of late afternoon, almost sunset effect. And as you can see, as the light was reflected off of the digital wallpaper created by Dutch graphic designer Carol Martens, you can see very clearly how that alters our perception of the color of that peony. In a more dramatic example, we installed Karnofsky's RGB wallpaper in a small gallery. So this is what it looks like under white light. It's sort of a jumble of colors and lines with no discernible imagery at all. But again, using the Philips Hue light bulbs to cycle through red, green, and blue light, you can see that under each lighting condition, a completely different scene is revealed in the wallpaper.
I absolutely loved watching visitors' reactions to this. People would, their jaws would drop. They'd almost be in disbelief that the color of light could change the color of everything. It would change what we see so dramatically. And color is full of optical phenomena, some of which we understand more than others. You've probably experienced looking towards a light and then looking away only to see the shadow of the light's silhouette floating in front of you, often in a different color. That phenomenon is called afterimage, and it was first identified in this 1839 publication by chemist and color theorist Michel Eugene Chevreul, who coined the term simultaneous contrast. Chevral had been hired by a textile manufacturer to fix the murkiness of their dyes, when he discovered it was not the dyes, but the weave of one color next to another that created this murky effect. This long fold out from his book demonstrates how different colored dots affect the appearance of other dots around them. This is a plate from Joseph Alber's landmark publication, Interaction of Color, from 1963. It is a color exercise designed to demonstrate the effects of afterimage. You can try it yourself by staring at the black dot in the center of the yellow circles while I read a passage from the introduction. Go ahead and lean in closer to the screen if you can. Albers writes, in visual perception, a color is almost never seen as it really is, as it physically is. This fact makes color the most relative medium in art. In order to use color effectively, it is necessary to recognize that color deceives continually. Now shift your gaze to the black dot at the center of the white square. What do you see? I wish I could see everyone's faces right now. Many of you should see yellow diamonds appear in the negative space that was between the circles. While most after-image results change the color to the opposite or complementary color, this example stays the same color of yellow, but magically transfers it to a different location. Why our eyes experience this phenomenon is unclear and continues to be researched today.
So in the color optics section of the exhibition, we looked at a variety of optical effects that are related to color, including iridescence, which is sometimes called structural color because there's actually no pigment involved at all. For instance, in the iridescence you see in a peacock feather. Fluorescence, where parts of the light spectrum that are normally invisible are made visible by fluorescent dyes or inks. And dichroic effects, where the color of the light passing through an object is different from the color that is reflected off of it. We had some stunning examples of Chevral's concept of simultaneous contrast, including this cover from a magazine called Engineering Aesthetics by Alexander Gelman, and the carnation wallpaper by the British firm Osborne and Little. When complementary colors are used side by side, each one seems to increase the chromaticness of the other, making the reds appear redder and the greens appear greener. Some people also experience optical vibrations at the point where the two colors meet, as each color competes for the foreground. And I think you can see that very vividly in these examples. We were also fortunate to have work in the collection by two of Joseph Alber's students, Richard Anaskevich and Victor Moscoso. Anaskevich's poster on the left for the League of Women Voters creates the illusion of a continuous gradation from a cool yellow in the upper left corner to a warm, saturated red-orange in the lower right. But he does that by manipulating the color of the frame around each box. And Victor Moscoso created a wealth of gorgeous psychedelic posters for music events in the 1960s. Although day-glow or fluorescent inks were widely available at that time, Moscoso declined to use them, relying instead on color theory. He used highly saturated complementary colors to create this eye-popping poster.
And in addition to featuring works by the students of Joseph Albers, my research also revealed a direct connection to Albers himself in conjunction with that 1960 Cooper Union Museum exhibition I mentioned earlier, The Logic and Magic of Color. I couldn't help noticing the color exercises on the wall are nearly identical to the ones Albers publishes 3 years later in Interaction of Color. And this was no coincidence. As it turns out, a Cooper Union art teacher at the time who was involved in this exhibition, named Hans Beckmann, had studied at the Bauhaus, where he was a student of Albers, and the two maintained a lifelong friendship. The Logic and Magic of Color was considered a great success at the time and led to the donation of many color-related materials that form the basis of Cooper Hewitt Library's extensive color collection. Saturated is just one story inspired by Smithsonian Library's extensive holdings. As you can see, our phenomenal collections not only support and inform museum exhibitions, but are also often an integral part of the stories and facts being shared. Our rare books continue to inspire exhibition narratives like Botanical Expressions, which will be on view when the Cooper Hewitt reopens, featuring over 20 of our rare books. And we look forward to welcoming you then.
Thank you so much, Jen and Susan. I had the chance to see Botanical Expressions just a couple weeks before the museum closed, and it was just spectacular. So I hope you all get the chance to see it when the museum reopens. And now I would like to open it up to our audience questions. So again, if you have any questions for our speakers about what they just talked about or what else goes on at the Cooper Hewitt Library and the Cooper Hewitt Museum, or anything, please submit them using the Q&A feature. And we'll start with this one. How was that RGB wallpaper made?
How is it made? It's, I think, digitally printed. It's a standard wallpaper. You can order it if you want to have that experience in your own home, although that might be a little intense to live with, we thought.
That's, yeah. I mean, I wonder, I think the idea of trying to layer all of those different scenes on top of each other, I think digitally would be probably the only way to make that happen. Another fun question, for both of you, what's your favorite color?
I always say it depends. I think, it depends on what I'm wearing. Is it color of paint for a room? I think I have general tendencies towards warmer colors, but not always. And I love all colors and color in general, so I could never pick a favorite.
I have to agree with Jen. I have, obvious preferences for the colors that I wear, but just out in the world, I love all colors.
Yeah, it's hard to choose just one. I agree. Another question here. Were you able to make any interpretive provisions in the exhibition space for visitors who may be colorblind or have other visual impairments?
Yeah, we did a visual description tour where people who had vision impairments came in, and we conducted a tour with a lot more visual description of the objects and actually received some training beforehand, just giving us ideas of how we could talk about color in ways that was more comparative to things that somebody with vision impairment could relate to, like perhaps, the sun is warm and that's red, things along those lines.
I have to say, Jen and I were both very nervous about it, about giving a tour for the visually impaired about a subject that is so highly visual. But it was really, really great. We had really excellent conversations, and people had very strong opinions and feelings about color. And for a couple of the people who came to visit, they said actually color was the only thing that they see. So color was very, very important to them.
Another question here. Do you have any resources available to research the materiality of color?
I mean, I think some of the Wiener Farben cabinet, I think, would speak to that, depending on what exactly they're looking for.
There were several other books about textile printing, right? There was a very important book on textile printing, as I recall.
Yeah, the Perzaz, which is a famous book too, because it inspired a lot of pointillist artists. So yeah,
feather dyeing.
What's that?
There was one on feather dyeing.
Oh yes, that's everybody's favorite. So yeah, there's a lot that you could dive into on that. And again, a lot of it is online. So whether you access it through Color in a New Light exhibition, which has a whole digital library within it as well, you can page through these books.
And that actually leads into the next question, which is there a catalog of the exhibition?
Unfortunately,
Sadly, no.
But we shared the channel, which is on the Cooper Hewitt website and has, you know, I think it has all of the objects that were in the exhibition. And if you want to learn more, you can check that out. Another question here, did you go into the significance of any colors? And did you show anything that talks about the meanings of colors, which goes back a long time historically?
Well, we considered it. So as I said, the topic is huge. So things had to be cut. And we really let the books and the objects sort of drive the themes that we covered. And there were certain themes too, especially getting into like the psychological realm of color, which can be closely related to meaning, that we avoided, just not being sort of, you know, definitive voices in that area by any means. It's an area people love to talk about, and we've gotten endless questions about it. One segment of the exhibition that does speak to it a bit is color forecasting. And the people who work in the color forecasting world can certainly talk about color in ways of how it affects your mood, and those fun aspects. And I think it is an area that deserves a lot more research as well.
That actually leads perfectly into the next question, which is, did you include information on the Pantone forecasted color of the year for product designs and consumers?
We did not. Pantone was featured in that we had the Pantone Skin Tone Guide, which was relatively new at the time, and one of these kinds of specialized tools that people like costume designers and makeup designers use to communicate behind the scenes about color. So that was our representation of Pantone particularly. But in general, these kind of color of the year things are a little bit of a promotional thing for the company. So that wasn't really in our wheelhouse, as they say.
I should say that the library does have resources that speak to what colors symbolize, especially coming from like Western society. You know, you get into Scottish tartans and heraldry flags, which are sort of these early uses of color as symbols.
So interesting. Another question, which should be an easy one, is do you own Newton's color optics?
Personally? The Dibner in DC, the History of Science and Technology Special Collection, is where we have the original first edition from 1704, which was featured in the exhibition. At Cooper Hewitt, we have the second edition from 1716, I believe, which is a lot smaller, but still great to have in our collection locally. So when I do presentations on site, I can still include Newton, even though we had to ship the original back to DC. But I should get a reprint. I don't own him myself. I could just read ours online, I guess.
Yes, we do have I am looking for, I have the link somewhere here, but we do have the digital digitized book available on our website. So actually, I'll just put that in the chat right now. Another question going back to color of the year is, wouldn't the color of the year influence the way people live and shop?
It does. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why there is a color of the year. It's kind of a marketing tool, if you will, whether it be for Pantone and their sort of product marketing end of what they do. They actually don't sell ink or paint the way that, say, Benjamin Moore does, who also announces a color of the year, which, has more of an audience, say, of interior decorators. But yeah, color of the year, I think, has a big marketing influence where you then start seeing it being used in fashion and industries.
It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. Like we're working with Piclair, which is a major trend forecasting company based in Paris. And they donated some of their color trend forecasting books to the libraries after the exhibition. But does a big company like that, by forecasting particular colors, drive what is produced and therefore what people are able to buy? Or are they forecasting something that's going to happen anyway without their influence?
Yeah, hard to say. Another question here. I was stunned by the difference in how colors mix in light as opposed to pigments. Are there similar large differences in how colors mix across mediums, such as oils versus pastels versus chemical dyes?
No, I've sort of been involved with some color specialist groups like color scientists, and they like to joke that there's no mixing of color, there is only mixing of paint. Meaning, all of these paints are made up of various materials, and it's really what's in those that you're mixing. You're not mixing pure colors, say. So I don't know if that answers the question.
But in a more general way, the red plus blue makes purple applies across most media, most physical media, excepting light.
There is kind of this movement within, again, these sort of color scientists, even in the education of color, that instead of using red, yellow, blue, it really is more the magenta and the cyan that, at least for printing, kind of mixes in a way that's more representative of how things really work. Because yeah, it absolutely depends on the materials you're using.
Sure.
Somebody just told me avocado can make a pink dye.
Wow. Oh, I guess from the pit, right?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know what part of the avocado they're using. But
I think that's the only part that, well.
Right, everything else is very green.
Yeah.
Right. Indigo comes from the leaves, and the leaves are green. Obviously, there's nothing blue about an indigo plant when you look at it. So,
yeah. So who knows? So here's a great question. Out of the breadth of color items in the collections, how do you decide what ultimately makes it into the exhibition? Is there anything you had to leave out? And can you tell us more about the curatorial and exhibition processes?
there was so much we had to leave out. We talked about the importance of black and white, which have enduring impact on design, for centuries. We talked about neutrals and pastels, because as you probably noticed, like a lot of the things that made it into the exhibition were very saturated, very brilliantly colored. So yes, we left out whole topics, and then, it's like a jigsaw puzzle trying to figure out what you can fit into a particular physical space that you're working in the galleries. And so things came and went, and the exhibition was on view for a fairly long time, so we had to do a rotation of objects in the middle of light sensitive objects. So for instance, in the creating color, the first case of that, we started with red and then we switched to blue halfway through the exhibition. And a lot of the books got a page turn, and some of the books had to be swapped out entirely if there was like one featured plate that was really the one we were talking about. In general, it was like completely delightful to explore the collection in this way, just, scouring for things that were beautiful, collaborating. We have a very wonderful collaborative group of curators who, you know, could chime in about objects that had really interesting color stories, or sometimes the opposite. I would say, this is so gorgeous, please tell me it has a really interesting color story. And luckily, almost every object does have a really interesting color story. So does that answer the question? Do you have anything you want to add, Jen?
I thought it was funny how, as we were looking too, you realize how many things we acquire in these neutral tones, and that it might sort of change future collecting habits. Like, instead of picking the off-white one, let's go with the bold orange one.
Right? Especially with upholstered furniture, we found it was fairly hard to find furniture pieces that had really, really brilliant color. But.
Well, this question sort of, well, it ties in a way to that whole idea. This person said, I went into a Benjamin Moore store today and I have their color app on my phone. Wow. Is there a number limit to the possible colors, shades, hues, etc.?
We're limited by what we can create. So our eyes see many more colors than we can reproduce. And we can reproduce them mainly by printing or through digital screens. And digital screens can actually fill a wider gamut of color than printing. So if you're thinking of paint, you know, paint printing is similar. You're dealing with pigments. So you are constrained by what the pigments we use today can achieve. Not to say there aren't new discoveries out there. You know, there are new colors that are invented occasionally, or designed or engineered, in the case of like a Vanta Black, that's, you know, not pigment based, but a bunch of microscopic vacuum tubes, if you will. So there is a technological component of what can be achieved, and we do have limits. And again, our eyes are the most colors we can achieve. We can't recreate everything our eyes can see.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great answer. Another question that I am also very curious about. Do you ever see people in the fashion industry discuss the importance of this academic study of color? And this person said, I'm thinking of the Devil Wears Prada scene about the blue sweater.
Yes, that scene is referenced quite a bit.
Yes, I'm sure.
I mean, I think the fashion industry takes color super seriously, and understands it in a way that I certainly don't. We had a brilliant assistant from the master's program. Cooper Hewitt has a master's program in the study of design and curatorial studies with Parsons and the New School. And our curatorial capstone was from the fashion world, and her input, I mean, really informed the show in a way I wouldn't have understood color if it wasn't for her. Like, so the fashion world knows a lot, and, you know, I'm sure they are wanting everybody to know a lot more about color too.
Yeah.
But she wasn't, you know, that movie shows a whole fashion attitude, and I want to say that's not part of it necessarily either.
But it was part of the exhibition that we didn't have time to talk about this evening, was about the origins of color forecasting, which really are in the fashion industry. The silk manufacturers in France, you know, had to alert the related industries to what they were proposing for the upcoming year, right? Because you can imagine, if you're proposing a peacock blue coat for next year, you need to be able to get fabrics and linings and zippers and buttons and possibly matching leathers or feathers or other things. And so the idea of sort of selecting a limited shade card, as they were called, shade cards, and circulating it widely in the ancillary industries that support the fashion industry, came about in the late 18th century, I think, in France.
Fascinating. Another question here. As a self-taught artist who loves saturated colors, I worry about when too much is too much. What do you think?
You know, we have so many books about, you know, recommending different color combinations. And they all kind of fall under this color harmony idea, that there's some formulaic scientific component of what color looks good with another color. And I don't think there's anything definitive that will come out of that. And it's interesting historically to see how societies responded to the invention of synthetic dyes, because all of a sudden people had colors they could obtain that they couldn't afford before. And so you had lots of people combining different colors together, and you had all these tastemakers saying how garish everybody was dressed, they don't know how to put colors together. But, you know, in large part, I think their eyes hadn't seen those colors on people, you know, so it was adjustment. But it went to an extreme where they would, you know, think people wearing garish colors were mentally inept or something. So, you know, the implications it has, depending on what point in history you're in, you know, but it seems to me, in seeing all the people that work with color, there are some people that have a natural ability to work with color in wonderful ways without knowing a thing about how color works. It's almost just like a language they speak naturally. And there are others that dive into color theory and work with color that way and do beautiful things with color. And there are certain color combinations that I don't like, but that's not to say somebody else won't like them. So again, color is so up to the person, up to the viewer, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Rules were meant to be broken.
Definitely. Yeah. Here's another question that should be a quick one. Is Werner's nomenclature of colors from 1821 included in the exhibition?
It wasn't in either exhibition, mostly because of space and also because we had Ridgway's nomenclature, and because Ridgway was Smithsonian's first ornithologist, curator of birds. And he got really into the study of color because, again, as a naturalist, you use color to help identify different species. But he went on like a 25-year tangent where he produced these books in his kitchen with his wife, clipping them out and helping him. And we have his archive at Smithsonian too. So although Werner came out earlier, and it isn't exactly like Werner's, and Werner's is lovely, and I think it inspired a whole paint line recently with Farrow and Ball, if you're interested. But we kind of opted for Ridgway, Robert Ridgway's nomenclature of color to tell that kind of story.
Here's another really interesting question. Any research on how colors evolve in various cultures, whether white is for joy or sorrow, whether yellow is for royalty or common people, etc.? There are studies out there. You know, there are some studies just based on language used around color, and different terminologies, and discovering, you know, some cultures might consider blue and green the same and they don't have a word for both to distinguish them. So, you know, because color fits so many disciplines, you sort of find pockets investigating those areas and different aspects. This sort of goes along with that. So some manufacturers name colors, which then invokes mental images and, you know, emotions, and then others just use numbers, which forces an individual to look at the color. So what do you think about those two approaches?
This is an age-old debate with people who work in these worlds.
Yes.
I think when it comes to paint manufacturers, you need names to help people connect with color. And then you need numbers to practically transaction business rather than coming up with elaborate names and remembering which one that was, you know, and the names change over time too. the numbers don't have to change, you know, just so for the business aspect of it, you know, giving an inventory number is a lot simpler than, you know, changing elephant's breath to iceberg gray, you know, a few years later or decades later or centuries later.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
And you know, specifically, a little story to go with that, Milton Bradley of board game fame, he also was really into color education because he produced art supplies. So he produced a book, Elementary Color, and he was a real avid proponent of using numbers and just being able to log it in that way to produce consistency. So you get these historic figures having very strong feelings about numbers versus names.
I see the benefits of both. What was the thing that you uncovered in your research for the exhibition that surprised you the most?
I mean, I didn't know the basics, that the primary colors of light were different than the primary colors of paint. So that blew my mind very early on. And then diving deeper into the research, I was thrilled to make this connection that Joseph Albers himself was connected to this historic exhibition. You know, for the story of color and how it's taught over time, it's you know, a small story, but it's a big deal in the bigger picture of how the pedagogy of color spreads, and how it hasn't, you know, evolved all that much. Joseph Albers remains sort of the go-to gold standard of color education, especially in America and higher education. So he's had a huge impact. So for me, it was exciting to know he was directly connected to what I thought was a great exhibition back in 1960.
What about you, Susan?
I don't have a ready response to that.
That's okay. It's a hard question. Here's another one that is also, well, this is difficult because it's pretty broad, but I think, you know, you've demonstrated this in a lot of interesting ways, but this person wants to know more about the interdisciplinary, you know, aspects of color.
Because it's so connected to so many disciplines, it just naturally, it naturally can relate within. So one way I like to use its interdisciplinary nature is, you know, everybody loves color. Like, you just have to say the word, and everybody has their own relationship with it. So whether you're interested in art, whether you're interested in science, whether you're interested in history, like, I can draw you in with a color story. And the other thing I love about it too is that you might not think you like physics. You might think you like art, but then you start learning about an art piece you like and the physics behind the color in it and how it works. And then you might get fascinated with physics. And seeing how so many of these color thinkers over time, the way they got into color was almost by accident. They didn't set out to research color and figure it out. Almost nobody did that. It was always because they were working on something else, and somebody had a color-related problem that they went on this crazy, like, tangent on for the rest of their lives at times, trying to figure out. So it's just fascinating how it connects from one discipline to another, and how the seductive nature of color can draw you into being interested in something you might not have ever thought you were interested in. I mean, I feel like if I learned about color at a younger age, maybe I would have been interested in physics. I love being a librarian, but I'm just saying, like, you know, maybe I wouldn't have been as scared of, I don't know, math or something along those lines. Or it just would have been, the content would have been more intriguing.
Yeah, it was one of our favorite games to play, to imagine doing an entire, like, Smithsonian-wide color exhibition where all of the different units would approach color from their own unique perspectives, whether that's the Fair Sackler looking at color in Asian art, or natural history looking at whatever, whether it's insects or birds or something else. But every one of the Smithsonian units could have a very unique story to tell about color.
And that's still like my secret dream that I hope it does spread, because when we had to create these shows, we were so limited and there's so many stories we couldn't tell. And these books, so many of them could have been their own exhibitions, you know, like the history of camouflage is a color story, which, I mean, you can imagine the exhibition that could go off of that. So, you know, it's the tip of the iceberg with many of these books. There's so much more.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I agree. I hope to one day see, you know, all the color stories from across the Smithsonian, because that would be just incredible. And I think that's a great note to end on. You know, we have a few more questions, but I want to make sure that, you know, we wrap up before 6 o'clock. So I hope everyone enjoyed learning more about color and the crucial role that the Smithsonian Library's books play, not only for research, but also as featured objects in Smithsonian exhibitions. And actually, Emily Orr, she actually curated the Cooper Hewitt exhibition that we mentioned earlier, Botanical Expressions. She recently said, "When I am planning an exhibition, the holdings of the Smithsonian Libraries are invaluable to completing the checklist. At Cooper Hewitt, the holdings in rare books complement the museum's collection of design objects in incredibly meaningful ways. As a curator who works across media, time periods, and geographies, I'm continually excited at how the library's resources fill out the design history stories that I aim to tell." And it's really because of supporters like all of you tuning in today that we're able to grow, preserve, and make accessible these important collections. So thank you so much. And if you did have a question that we didn't get to, we'll do our best to follow up with you. And we did, like we said, record the program, so we'll be sharing it after today. But if you have any further questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach our whole advancement team at silrsvp.si.edu. And you can also share your thoughts by filling out our short survey after the session ends. And if you're not already subscribed to our email list, please sign up on our website at library.si.edu about halfway down on the home page. That's really the best way to stay informed about what we're up to and other special opportunities like this. So thank you again so much for joining us today, and we hope you and yours stay safe and healthy, and good night.